She was labeled 0 reproductive value, and everyone laughed until a human got her pregnant. The mud hit her face with it smack, and for a second, just a second, it looked like the soil responded. Thread-thin root purple and translucent squirmed. From the cracked ground where it landed, no one else noticed, but he did. Marin stood at the edge of the square sun behind him, dust curling at his boots. No greetings, no handshakes, just stares. Measured, amused, dismissive. His arrival was not a surprise. They'd been warned. They always warned about men like him, exiles with degrees and defiance. A woman scoffed as she passed another central scrap. He'll be gone before frost. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. His punishment was stamped on his back in the form of this remote assignment. No appeal, no trial, just a slow, quiet erase-her-own minute. He was Dr. William Willie Marin, lead xenobotanist at ARC Station 12. The next, he was a man stripped of rank for refusing to weaponize root sleep toxins on sentient crop species, not enough to jail, too much to forgive. So they buried him in a village at the edge of cultivated space where things didn't grow right and people didn't look you in the eye unless they were laughing around him. The colony groaned. Rusted aqueduct leaked pale blue water into thirsty soil that refused to hold it. The plum-colored crops, their stalks tall, waxy, and almost fleshy, twitched faintly in the wind, as if listening, as if waiting. Their root systems, he'd been told, grew horizontally. And, shallow a weakness the elders blamed on bad seed, and useless hands, most of the blame fell on her, the girl they called Dry. Sheck knelt beside the far greenhouse, alone, hands deep in the dirt. Her skin shimmered a muted green, sun-dappled, and her hair fell in a long red curtain over one shoulder, not styled, just pulled back out of the way she wore the same rough-stitched tunic as everyone else, but hers was stained with soil and time. Another villager tossed a pebble near her, fertilized that Dry girl. No reaction, she stayed bent, working as if she didn't hear, or worse, expected it. Marin took a slow breath, the old instinct step in, speak up lit in his gut. But his hands stayed at his sides. Not yet. The greenhouse they gave him sat near the edge of the crop line, framed by two half-dead irrigation towers and a collapsed compost bin. Its roof was mottled with rust glass panes cracked and patched with wax tarp vines crept up one wall, colorless and limp. It smelled like fungal rot and disappointment. He pushed open the warped door, a single droplet from the ceiling hit the floor and hissed away in a breath of steam. It was worse inside. Marin dropped his duffel and scanned the space. No working lights. The hydro regulators were half-melted soil trays, caked with something like mold, but too dark too. Wither stepped over a dead irrigation line and crouched beside one of the troughs when he pressed his fingers into the earth. It clung too tightly, oversaturated and acidic. Nothing short of miracle would take root here. He removed his gloves, tried again, barekind, no miracle. Outside, the wind shifted. Heard voices, more laughter. She doesn't even bleed properly, someone said. How's she supposed to breathe? Marin turned slightly through the cracked glass. He saw her again, the girl she was carrying, a flat of seedlings, not looking at anyone, not walking fast enough to avoid them. A tall man stepped into her path. You know the elders already called you barren, don't you? Even your saplings die faster. She froze. Tray tight in her hands, Marin felt his jaw clench. His hand hovered near the door latch. One word and he'd be in it, one step and he'd be exiled from exile. But she moved first, quietly stepped around the man, never meeting his eyes. He let the latch go that night. He set his cot outside the greenhouse. There was no way he was sleeping in that mildew chamber. Stars rolled above like scattered ice. The silence here had weight. Not peaceful, not lonely, just intentional. He didn't unpack. The heat. Stone. The next morning, someone had been inside. Not looting, altering. A single tray near the center had been emptied, then filled with a different soil, darker, looser. The rows were drawn, tight finger width, channels etched with precision. No note, no boot prints. He crouched beside it and touched the top layer, still slightly warm. Not the village's work, her work. He glanced through the cracked panel and saw her near the compost heap, coaxing moisture from a leaf bundle with practiced rhythmic movements. She never looked his way. The air buzzed faintly with staticone of the upper vent, sparked, then died with a low whine that afternoon. She came closer, not into the greenhouse, just near it. She set something at the threshold, a cloth-wrapped bundle, and walked Away Murrin waited until she was gone to open it inside 6 seeds. Black smooth, unlike any he'd cataloged, they smelled faintly of ozone and pine resin. He looked out across the field. She was gone again. But something in the gesture had shifted the air between them later. He heard footsteps near the greenhouse, 2 villagers muttering, "Swear if he tries her methods." Artie saw mold regrowing. Elder says it's sabotage. Maybe time we burned that place out for good. They didn't see him inside, didn't knock, just walked away into the dusk. Voices fading. Marin stood still for a long moment. The cloth bundle in one hand, the seeds in the other. Then he walked to the center tray she'd prepared and planted 2. Exactly where her lines were drawn if they came. To burn it, they'd find something already beginning to grow. He didn't expect them to bloom, but neither did he expect her to care she had. And now so did he. The greenhouse smelled like old earth and quiet defiance. Willie crouched beside the seed tray. Just after dawn, frost had kissed the topsoil overnight, leaving behind a fragile crust that cracked beneath his touch. He brushed the surface aside. Careful, slow, the seeds were still there. 3 black stones wrapped in folded leaves resting in shallow beds of aerated moss, but the soil had been disturbed not by wind, not by vermin. Someone had touched them. He stood and scanned the interior. No footprints, no displaced tools, just that unmistakable stillness, like the air itself had been asked to keep. A secret. He didn't smile, but he breathed out once long and low. She'd come back outside the fields, whispered plum stalks shimmered faintly. In the early light, their long, bulbous leaves shifting with the morning's first breath of wind. The roots ran, shallow hair starved of depth and warmth, genetically modified for fast yields, the kind Central favored. But they clung to life with a kind of stubbornness that reminded him of her Aya. He hadn't heard anyone say her full name aloud. They all called her Dry Girl, as if that defined her. He strapped the broken latch tighter, reinforced it with wire from the collapsed shed, then set off toward the water trench where he'd last seen her. The path ran between 2 irrigation spines, both rusted half through. Steam hissed softly from ruptured seams. The moisture that should have fed the field instead pulled uselessly in the dust. He found her kneeling again, same position, same stillness. She worked with short, efficient movements, stripping residue from filter, mesh and binding it with frayed plant fibers, her hair long. Andred was pulled back tight-tied with a twist of braided reed. The same tunic, the same silence. He stopped a few paces behind her and waited. "I used the seed," she said. Finally, she didn't turn. "They're alive," but the soil was touched. Her left hand froze just for a second, then resumed moving. He studied the way she worked. Her hands knew the ground. The way a musician knows keys, where to press, when to lift. How not to ask too much at once. "I didn't water them," he added. "The leaf wrap had enough moisture." A pause, then her voice dry as wind and barely audible. "Don't bury them deep." He tilted his head. "Why not? They forget how to reach." That was all. She didn't speak. Again he left without pushing. Further back at the greenhouse, the light slanted lower, slicing between cracked panes and sharp lines. Dust floated through them like seeds that had never landed. He spent the afternoon repairing a pipe that wouldn't seal his hands. Worked steadily, but his mind kept circling her words. They forget how to reach. What did that mean exactly? How many times had she tried and been forced to grow anyway? By dusk, the soil had shifted again. He saw it immediately. One of the 3 planted seeds now sprouted. The faintest green thread coiled tightly. Trembling in the cooling air, it shouldn't have germinated that fast, but it had. He checked the other 2 intact. Unchanged that night, he slept inside the greenhouse, not out of necessity, but protection. The boys, who'd hovered outside before their laughter, hadn't been harmless. Curiosity mixed with cruelty always went sour when ignored. Around midnight, movement outside drew him upright. No sound, just a flicker past the glass. He rose silently, stepped to the doctor and eased it open. She was there, just beyond the path. Half in shadow, arms loose at her sides, not holding anything. Not hiding. He didn't speak, neither did she. But then her gaze shifted past him into the greenhouse. "You don't need to guard them," she said. Her voice held no accusation, no softness either. Just fact. They don't understand what they are. Willie replied. They never tried. She didn't say who. She didn't need to. She turned to leave. Wait. He said. She stopped. He walked forward slowly, then set a small folded cloth on the edge of the path between them. Inside one of the seedlings' first leaves pressed gently between two squares of insulating mesh. It opened. He said. Isla looked down. Her expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes did a soft blink. A shift in breath. It's listening, she said. Then she left. He watched her until the field swallowed her silhouette. The next day the boys came back. This time they didn't speak. They walked the edge of the crop, stopped near the compost bin, and threw a rock at the greenhouse door. It struck with a sharp clang, bounced once, and rolled into the dust. Willie stepped outside before they could try again. He didn't shout, just looked at them. The taller one hesitated, just passing by, he muttered. They walked off, but their silence was a promise. He reinforced the hinges that night, took apart a broken seed tray, and fashioned a crude lock. Not foolproof, but better than nothing. When he finally sat down to eat boiled root chips and protein paste, he realized it was the first proper meal he'd had in 2 days. The work had consumed his attention. The thought made him glance at the sprout again, still standing still. Reaching, Aya returned the next evening. Not with seeds, not with words. She stood near the door and waited until he opened it. Then without a word she stepped. Inside she moved like someone crossing sacred ground. Slow, cautious, not touching anything. She stopped beside the growing tray and looked down at the sprout. Her hand hovered above it. Then she spoke, not to him but to the plant. Still breathing? She murmured. He didn't interrupt. She turned to leave. Why do they call you dry? He asked. Her shoulders stiffened. The light caught the red in her hair like fire under water. They said I couldn't bloom. And did you believe them? She didn't answer. Other eyes lingered on the sprout as she stepped outside. This time when she left, she pulled the door closed behind her. He took that as trust a seed in its own right. Something small. Something. Living. Something about to grow. The morning air was cold, enough to sting. Willie crouched near the greenhouse threshold, his breath fogging in shallow bursts as he checked the sprout stem for signs of stress. It stood firm, one translucent green shoot, arsing just above the soil, new life coaxed from a seed no one believed could bloom behind him. The rest of the greenhouse remained still, quiet, guarded. It had become more than shelter. It was a line in the dirt, drawn between decay and something unspoken but alive. He heard footsteps before he saw her. Aya didn't announce herself. She never did, but he could tell it was her. By the lightness of the steps and the way the field seemed to quiet around her presence. She stopped a few feet away. He didn't look up right away. He wanted her to choose the moment. Eventually she spoke. You stayed. Willie glanced at her, then her eyes weren't on him. They were on the tray on the sprout, pushing its way into the chill light. So did it, he said softly. She stepped forward close enough to share breath. She didn't speak again, but she didn't turn away either. That was enough for now. They worked in tandem for the rest of the morning. She sifted compost through woven mesh, separating viable mulch from rot. He scraped mineral buildup from the intake valves and sealed 2 leaking joints. No words passed between them. Just the hum of movement and the hiss of the greenhouse settling into its rhythm. At noon, Willie heated a flat stone on the small cooker and laid out sliced root vegetables. It wasn't much, but it was warm. He offered her one. Silently, she hesitated. Just a flicker, but took it. She ate slowly, chewing with careful patience. At one point, her hand trembled. Not from hunger. From memory, he didn't ask. Instead, he offered another slice this time. Her fingers brushed his. She flinched at the contact, a small, involuntary jerk, then looked down at her hand like she touched something she wasn't supposed to. I'm not allowed, she whispered, more to herself than to him. Allowed what? Willie asked gently. Her mouth opened, closed, then she said it like peeling bark off a raw wound to be touched. He held her gaze, steady and quiet. I'm not touching you, he said. Just sharing food. She nodded, but her jaw was tight, and her shoulders curled slightly inward. The meal passed in silence after that. By Afternoon, the clouds began to thicken, pressing low over the colony's edge. The village's central kiln released its daily blast of heat, a sharp exhale of ash that darkened the sky over the fields. Willie saw shadows gather along the southern rows, villagers moving with the deliberate slowness of people pretending not to be watching. 2 men lingered longer than the others' eyes. Fixed on the greenhouse, Willie closed the door, not abruptly, just firmly enough to make a point. Ayla noticed. "They don't like it," she said, her voice unreadable. "They don't have to," Willie replied. "They think I'm dangerous." He raised an eyebrow. She gestured toward the tray. "Things grow around me that shouldn't. Maybe they should have paused, then quieter. They think you're too close. I'm not here to please them." Her expression changed. Barely, the muscles around her mouth softened, and her eyes dropped. "For a second they might come tonight." Willie's tone didn't shift. "Let them." That night he locked the door. He didn't sleep. Instead he sat near the seed tray, a heating stone warming his knees, his thoughts steady and alert. Just after midnight he heard movement, not footsteps, breathing, a presence just outside the greenhouse wall. Then a voice, low, mocking. "Got your mold lover sleeping in there." Willie didn't move a second. Voice joined. Heard she cursed the yield down at third plot. "Elders are talking." Willie stood slowly and crossed to the door. He didn't open it, but he didn't stay silent. "Say it louder," he said. "See who else hears you." Silence. Then retreating steps when dawn came. The greenhouse was untouched, but someone had left a pile of scorched leaves near the entrance, subtle but clear, a warning or a threat. Ella returned just after sunrise. She didn't look at the burnt leaves. She didn't comment on the smell of char. Instead, she walked to the tray, knelt beside the sprout, and rested her hand just above the soil. Then softly she said, "They're afraid of what I might become." Willie looked at her, then at the fragile green curl emerging from the ground. "No," he said, "they're afraid because they already know." She turned to him and, for the first time, didn't look away. Her eyes shimmered with something unspoken, hope maybe, or the fragile beginnings of it. She stayed with him the rest of the day. They worked in silence, not because they had nothing to say, but because they didn't need to fill the space anymore. When she left that evening, she touched the door frame lightly with her fingers, an old gesture, maybe cultural, maybe instinctual. And Willie, watching her disappear into the field, realized something had changed. Not her, not yet, but him. He had come to this colony to disappear now. For the first time, he wanted to be seen. The storm came before the warning bell sounded. It wasn't lightning or wind that announced it, just the smell, a sudden shift in the air, sharp and bitter like scorched minerals and wet metal. Willie caught it as he was clearing algae from the irrigation tubes, the scent pulling his head up mid-motion. A second later, the greenhouse creaked under pressure, then groaned as if something vast had just exhaled overhead. He looked up through the fractured glass ceiling. The sky was no longer gray. It had turned a dense chemical yellow, the kind that didn't belong to any natural weather pattern. Colony storms weren't meteorological. They were system failures. Atmospheric control, faltering under pressure, dumping half-treated water vapor and static discharge across kilometers. The village kiln, if overfired, could trigger a chain reaction in the artificial climate system. This wasn't just bad luck, this was negligence, and it was coming fast. Willie dropped the tools and started sealing the greenhouse's makeshift hatches. They weren't designed for containment, but he layered tarp over the worst cracks, twisted wire through every latch, and used compost bins as deadweight to brace the inner door. He'd just secured the main seam when he heard her cough, sharp, dry from outside. He turned, heart lurching. Aya stood just beyond the greenhouse. Her clothes were soaked, skin streaked with dust and acid-smudged water. She held one arm close to her body. Hurt maybe, but her eyes were focused on him. She hadn't come for shelter. She hadn't expected it. She'd come to check the sprout. "Get in," he said, stepping toward the door. She didn't move. "I said get inside." Still, she hesitated. Then another cough racked her worse. This time she staggered slightly. That broke him. Willie crossed the threshold, grabbed her gently by the arm, and pulled. Her inner skin was cold, wet cloth clinging to her, back her hair heavy with chemical rain. She stumbled, but he caught her before she hit the floor. She didn't resist. He pulled the door shut behind them and bolted it with a rusted iron rod. The storm roared outside, now rattling the glass with thick, uneven pulses. The air inside the greenhouse smelled like wet soil and stress. He guided her to a cot he kept folded behind the seed trays and helped her sit. Only then did he see the wound just above, her elbow shallow but raw, torn through fabric and flesh by something sharp. A broken panel, maybe it was bleeding, but not badly. "I'm going to clean it," he said. She flinched at his voice. "It'll sting." She didn't answer. She looked away. Willie opened his med kit, pulled out a strip of cloth, a packet of coagulant, and a thermal pad. He worked efficiently with the practiced calm of someone who'd done field work in places where help was always far away as he dabbed at the cut. Her breath hitched. He stopped. "Too much?" "No," she whispered. He glanced up. Her eyes were locked on the far wall, not crying, just holding still in that way that said she was trying not to fall apart. He finished, wrapping her arm, then offered her a heat pack. She didn't take it. He placed it on her lap and sat a few feet away, giving her space. The silence stretched. The storm outside deepened like gravel being poured across the roof, then scraped back by wind. The crops would suffer for this, maybe even die. But in here it was warm still. She broke the silence first. "I was 6 the first time they told me I had no value." Willie didn't respond. He let the words settle. "They measured my genetic viability, reproductive index, and metabolic ratios too low. They said 0 reproductive value. That's what they put in the ledger." Willie looked at her, but she still stared at the wall. "They stopped assigning me group. Task said I'd distract the others. The other girls were allowed to braid their hair with gold grass. I wasn't. It wasn't worth the dye." He didn't offer comfort, just listened. "I used to sing to the soil," she said, voice thinner. Now they thought it was madness, but the plants listened. Not all of them, not always, but sometimes the soil remembers softness. She finally looked at him. "I forgot how that felt until you." Willie blinked. The air inside the greenhouse felt suddenly smaller. "I'm not here to fix you," he said carefully. "Came here broken, I know, but I'll protect what grows." He added, his voice firmer. "Even if it starts in silence." She nodded. Then slowly, she reached out her fingers, hovered above his for a breath. Unsure, shaking, then rested there. A fragile contact, nothing more, but he didn't move. And when her hand trembled, he gently covered it with his own. That night the storm peeled at the roof, tore at the frame inside. They sat side by side on the cot, hands touching, sharing warmth in a space meant only for decay. But something was growing here now, and neither of them wanted to leave. The greenhouse had never felt this still. The air inside held its breath, thick with the scent of root sap, moss, and something older, something settling outside. Wind moved across the distant plum fields, but in here it was warm, heavy, almost sacred. The sprout in the center tray had opened its second leaf, broad and full, catching condensation as it dripped from the patched roof above. Willie watched the bead of moisture collect, tremble, then fall, absorbed instantly into the living green. He looked up. Aya stood near the irrigation valve, her fingers trailing along the pipe like she was listening through her skin. She didn't speak. She rarely did unless it mattered. Her hair was tied back with reed string, her tunic stained from hours spent bent over soil, and her eyes held the quiet calculation of someone who'd grown used to surviving unnoticed. But now she was being noticed. Willie returned to clearing sediment from the compost hatch, but his attention never strayed far from hers. Since the storm, she'd returned every day, not as a visitor, as something closer. She'd started tending her own row, leaving small markers in the soil, 3 pebbles lined to the left, a slice of dried leaf embedded at the end of each trench. She didn't explain the meaning. She didn't have to. The plants responded, and so did he. They worked until mid-afternoon without saying a word. Just the quiet clatter of tools and the rush-off water filtering through recycled piping. It was a rhythm, and it held at some point. She stood beside him with a bowl of steamed root slices. She'd prepared them using heat stone and salt water from the filter unit. When he took the bowl from her hands, her fingers brushed his. She didn't flinch. He looked up. Neither of them smiled, but something shifted later while inspecting the seed trays. She crouched beside the circular vine they'd replanted 2 days ago. The plant had begun winding. Again, tendrils curling back on themselves. "It's choking itself," she murmured, still afraid of space. Willie replied. She nodded, or still remembering where it's been. He moved to her side. and gently unwound a few coils, pressing the tendrils outward into fresh moss. She watched his hands closely, then touched the root base herself. Her fingers moved beside his deliberate calm. They stayed like that, kneeling in the dirt, hands brushing occasionally, not speaking. Eventually, she broke the silence. "I wanted to teach soil," she said, "before they labeled me." He paused. "You still do." "I lost the right. My body was declared non-viable, unfit for instruction, for reproduction, for partnership." "You didn't lose anything." He said. "They took it." She studied him. "Why are you still here?" "Because I finally found something worth planting." Ayla didn't move at first, then slowly, carefully. She stood. "I won't be touched unless I choose it." She said. "You don't owe me anything," he answered. "I know." She stepped toward him. Close he stood, as well, their faces inches apart. Her breathing had quickened, but not from fear. Her gaze didn't waver. "If I ask you," she said, "would you treat me like I'm not broken?" He reached out, fingertips brushing her jaw, not claiming, not demanding, only if you ask. "I'm asking." That night, the greenhouse turned into something more than a refuge. They lay on a pallet made from bundled cloth and layered moss. The glow of the bioluminescent leaves casting soft green light across the curved glass walls. Outside, the wind hummed across the irrigation grid. The world unchanged, but inside here, something rare unfolded. Aya moved first, slowly. Intentionally, her hand rested on Willie's chest. Tentative, at first, like she was waiting for resistance, but none came. He remained still, his breath steady beneath her palm, warmth radiating upward into her fingers. She leaned in, brushing her lips against his shoulder. It wasn't a kiss. Not yet. It was something older, something more primal. Recognition. Her breath hitched, caught halfway between fear and hunger. Then steadied, she lifted her head to meet his eyes. He saw the questions there, the tension, the doubt, but also the flicker of something. Bolder, desire, permission, wonder. He didn't reach for her. He didn't have to. She climbed into his lap, slow and deliberate, her knees straddling either side of his legs. The movement wasn't rushed or rehearsed. It was full of curiosity, the kind that's only possible when there's trust underneath it. Willie inhaled sharply, not from surprise, but from the quiet intensity of her weight settling onto him. Her hands pressed against his shoulders, then slid up to cup his face, thumbs grazing the line of his cheekbones. Her fingers weren't practiced. They were exploring. She was learning him by touch. "You're not afraid," she whispered. "I've been waiting," he said, voice low, hushed like soil being turned at dawn. She tilted her head, her red hair falling in a curtain between them. "So have I." Their lips met, not desperate, not frantic, but deep. She kissed like someone tasting something she never thought she'd be allowed, like she was claiming space no one had ever offered her before, and Willie let her. He kissed her back with quiet reverence, hands remaining at her waist, resisting the urge to pull her closer until she asked for it when she did. When her hips shifted slightly, her breath catching again, he answered with a firm, grounding touch guiding. Without taking, Aya gasped into his mouth, a soft sound, vulnerable. Then she pressed closer, her body fitting against his like it had been waiting for this moment without ever daring to hope for it. Her tunic slipped from one shoulder. His fingertips traced the curve of her collarbone, pausing when she trembled. Not from fear, but from sensation. New, overwhelming, real. "Is this?" she began, voice unsteady. "Is this supposed to feel like this?" He searched her face, making sure, always making sure. "Only if it does," she laughed softly, a raw, almost startled sound. "I feel everything." "Good," he murmured. "Don't stop." She didn't. She leaned forward, her forehead resting briefly against his, grounding herself before she reached between them, guiding him where her body had only ever been told it would be barren. She moved with care, slow, adjusting breath. Shallow Asher hips sank down inch by inch until he was inside her, and then she froze, not in pain, in awe. Her fingers tightened on his shoulders, and she let out a sound he'd never heard before, a low, astonished moan, deep and quiet, and filled with something she had no words for yet. Willie's hands gripped her hips, gently anchoring her, giving her time. "You're okay," he whispered. "I'm more than okay." She started to move cautious, at first feeling every inch exploring the rhythm like a dance she was inventing for the first time. Her eyes fluttered closed as sensation built, and when she found the pace that matched her breath, she stayed there, riding him with a grace that was unrefined but entirely hers. She made sounds. She didn't try to hide small, breathy gasps that deepened into soft moans, and when she leaned forward, bracing her hands on either side of his head, she let her forehead rest against his as she lost herself in the sensation of being filled, being held, being seen. Her voice came in a whisper, shaky and disbelieving. "I didn't know I could feel like this." Willie kissed her jaw, her neck, the hollow between her collarbones. "You were never the problem," he murmured. She gasped, her hips moving faster now, driven by a need of them could name, yet she rode him with abandon, with wonder, with the kind of desperate joy that only someone who thought they'd never be wanted could feel. And when release came, it came like spring breaking through ice, sudden, unstoppable. Raw, she cried out, voice cracking with pleasure and something deeper. Release, arrival, rebirth. He followed her seconds later, holding her tightly, not to possess, but to share in it afterward. She collapsed against his chest skin. Damp breath, uneven, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of what they'd done, of what it meant, of what it had changed when she finally spoke. It was a whisper pressed into his collarbone. "You were the first." He tightened his arms around her. "I'll be the last." She smiled, soft, tired, real, and for the first time in her life she fell asleep in someone's arms without fear. The change didn't come all at once. It began as a whisper in her body, just a flicker like a breath caught in the hollow beneath her ribs. Ayla had spent her life studying the soil, learning how to sense when something was shifting, even if it hadn't yet broken the surface. This felt the same. A warmth where there had only ever been cold, a fullness she had no memory of carrying. 3 mornings had passed since the night they had shared, since she'd guided him into the space. No one had ever been allowed to enter, not even in dreams, and now something lived inside her. Not metaphor, not symbol, life. She stood barefoot in the greenhouse, moss soft beneath her feet, her hand resting over the curve of her belly. The sky beyond the glass was streaked with silver light. The early sun filtered through mist. Willie hadn't woken yet. He lay curled under the thermal blanket in the corner where the roots hung low. His breathing was steady, his presence anchoring. Aya took one slow breath, then another. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. She didn't know what to call this fluttering sensation beneath her navel. It wasn't movement, not yet, but it was presence, a pressure, a warmth. She sank down onto her knees beside the tray, where they had planted the first sprout together. It had bloomed 2 days ago. Unexpected, bold, its violet petals soft as breath. She'd watched it open slowly, like it had been waiting for her. So had this. She closed her eyes, pressed both hands flat against her abdomen. It was absurd. Biologically dismissed, declared impossible by her people before she was old enough to speak. Her reproductive markers had been labeled null. Medical documentation had been sealed with the phrase 0 reproductive value. So why, then, did her body feel like this? Why did the thought of it make her tremble, not from fear, but something close to awe? A sudden motion behind her, then the soft thud of bare feet on stone. She turned. Willie stood in the doorway of the sleeping alcove, rubbing his eyes, blinking. Into the morning light he looked, rumpled, peaceful, and then his expression changed. He saw her, the way she knelt, the way her hands gripped herbally, like they were holding back the world. He was at her side in 3 steps. "What's wrong?" he asked, kneeling beside her. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, but her throat was tight. I don't know how to say this." Willie waited. He never rushed her. She looked at him, really looked, and then reached for his hand. She pressed it against her stomach. Not hard, just enough to share what she was feeling. "It's there," she whispered. He didn't move. Not for a long moment. Then slowly he looked up at her. "Are you saying?" Her breath shuddered out of her. "I think I'm pregnant." Willie's eyes widened, but not in panic. Not in disbelief. Just wonder. He pressed his hand, flatter against her belly. Fingers sprawled like he was holding something sacred. "But they said I know what they said," she whispered. But they were wrong. She was shaking now. Not from cold. From something too big to name. This isn't supposed to happen, she said, voice cracking. They'll think it's a mutation, an accident. A mistake. It's none of those things. Her hands trembled in her lap. What if they try to take it? He took her face in both hands, gently tilting her gaze to his. Then they'll have to go through me. Her lower lip quivered. She closed her eyes. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I, he said, but not of you, never of you. She exhaled, and in that breath was a surrender. Not to fear, but to truth, to possibility. Willie pulled her into his arms, and she let herself be held for a long time. They just sat there on the floor, knees against moss, breath sinking, hands tangled. I didn't think this was possible, she whispered into his chest. Neither did I. And yet, here you are. Later that morning, the greenhouse became a flurry of movement. Willie reinforced the shade covers, checked the heating vents, and adjusted the nutrient lines. Ayla moved slower than usual, her mind elsewhere, hands trailing across seedlings like she was listening for the heartbeat of something invisible. The rumors started that afternoon. It was a boy from the outer fields who saw them first. Willie brushing soil from Aya's knees, Aya holding his hand a beat too long, both of them smiling. He ran back to the village, whispering the same words that would spread in hours. She's carrying something. I saw by dusk 3 elders had called a quiet meeting. No one spoke to them directly. Not yet. But eyes followed her through. Every path she walked, some full of confusion, others full of something colder. Willie noticed it. The shift sodded Aya that night. She stood barefoot outside the greenhouse, hands cradling her lower belly, eyes on the sky. I dreamed once, she said as he joined her, that I'd plant something in this world that would last longer than me. Willie stood beside her, shoulder to shoulder. You have. I thought I was empty, she whispered. You were never empty. He said you were just waiting for something worth growing. She turned to him, her eyes shimmered. You still want to stay? He reached out and laced their fingers together. I'm not just staying, he said. I'm building something with you. And that night, as they lay curled together beneath the thin roof of leaf and light, Aya didn't dream of exile or shame or silence. She dreamed of a girl with her eyes and his smile, running barefoot through wild vines, and for the first time in her life she woke with no fear of what came next. Only hope. The sky split open just before dawn. Not with thunder, but with light. Soft golden light spilled over the greenhouse roof, sliding down cracked glass panels, casting fractured warmth across the soil. Bed's dew glittered on the vines like jewels. A warm breeze moved through the fields. Not like the sterilized, programmed winds of the colony's early years, but something more natural. Something earned. Ella stood at the edge of the garden, her arms wrapped around her belly, now full round. Undeniable, she was due any day. Willie worked a few feet away, adjusting the solar weave along the water barrels, his hands, steady, shoulders broader from months of labor. He paused often now, not from fatigue, but to watch her, as if every breath she took was sacred, as if he still couldn't quite believe she was real. The village hadn't stopped watching either. At first they had stared with disbelief, then with judgment. But lately, with wonder, no one had tried to interfere. Not openly. The whispers had quieted. Even the most rigid among the elders had stopped trying to call her pregnancy unnatural. Because no one could explain it, and no one could deny what was happening around the greenhouse. Crops had begun to flourish. In impossible ways. Species thought barren now bore fruit roots, ran deeper, leaves held color longer where she walked. Things bloomed. No one knew why, but everyone knew when it had started. That morning she turned toward Willie and smiled, soft, exhausted, but genuine. I think it's time. He dropped the wrench in his hand. What? She raised her eyebrows, amused. I said, I heard you, he said, already crossing the garden to her. Are you sure? I've been sure for 3 days, she said. I just didn't want to admit it. He took her hand. Now. They made it into the greenhouse before the first wave hit her. She gripped the edge of the compost bin, breath hissing between her teeth. Willie guided her to the pallet he'd layered with fresh moss and warmed cloth. He helped her lower herself down gently, brushing damp hair from her forehead. I'm here, he said. I know. The labor was long. It came in waves, pressure, release, silence, then fire again. Aya bore it without screaming. Her pain wasn't quiet, but it was dignified. She breathed, through clenched teeth, one hand gripping the woven roots beneath her, the other clinging to Willie's wrist like it was the only tether left in the world. He didn't leave her. Not for water, not forest. He sat beside her through every contraction, whispering when she let him, holding her when the shakes came. At one point, she broke, tears sliding down her cheeks, her voice cracking. "I can't do this." "You already are," he said. "You've done everything they said you never could. This is just the last lie falling apart." She sobbed then, but not in surrender, in release. And when the final push came, she gritted her teeth, arched forward, and let the cry tear through her chest like roots breaking stone. Then silence. Then a single high-pitched wail. Willie caught the child in his hand, stunned, slimy, perfect, red-cheeked and alive. "It's a girl," he whispered. Ayla collapsed back. Trembling, "Is she? She's perfect." He wrapped the child in cloth, placed her against Aya's chest the moment their skin touched the baby. Quieted, Ayla blinked down at her, daughter-wide, curious eyes blinking up at her. Not blue, not green, somewhere in between. Hair, fine copper, dark hands, small reaching. Willie sat beside them, unable to speak. Aya stroked the baby's back. "Alan," she said. He looked at her. "That word you told me." She nodded, eyes wet. "It means first green after drought." They didn't move for a long time. The sun climbed high outside. Villagers paused in their work. Some came quietly to the greenhouse's edge. No one entered, but they stood in stillness, watching. Watching her. Later that evening, someone left a clay bowl of berries at the door, then a satchel of dried herbs, then 3 bundles of thread. By nightfall, the door was surrounded with offerings, food supplies, even a wrapped tunic in child size. A quiet declaration, "We see you." Inside, Aya lay curled with Aylin sleeping against her chest. Willie sat at her side, stroking the baby's back with a fingertip, his eyes wide with something deeper than awe. "I didn't think it was possible," he said. Aya smiled faintly. "We stopped believing in what wasn't measurable." He looked at her. "You were the one they measured wrong." She closed her eyes, not in sleep, but in peace. Maybe they didn't know what to look. For Willie lay down beside her, pulling them both into the curve of his body. Outside, the vines rustled in the breeze and the stars blinked down through the glass. In the days that followed, the village changed, not overnight, but steadily. Ella was no longer ignored. Her garden became a place of teaching. Young girls came to ask her about soil, about growth. Elders began to listen when she spoke. No one called her dry again. She didn't leave the village. She changed to tone. Evening, months later, as the sun dipped low and Aylin played in the moss beds, Aya turned to Willie, watching him repair a drip line. "You stayed," she whispered. He glanced up. "Of course I did. That's what made it real." He walked over, leaned down, kissed her gently. "You were always fertile ground," he said. "They just didn't know how to plant gently." They stood together as Aylin toddled through the vines, arms outstretched, fingers brushing every leaf like she was blessing them. And above them, the sky stayed open, clear, unbroken. It was the season of long days and full harvests, the time the colony once called Resource Cycle 9, but which the villagers now simply referred to as Green Wakek. The name had begun as a joke coined by a young boy after Allah's garden spilled out past the greenhouse and swallowed half the empty commons. Now it was tradition. And on this day, the sun rose slowly, washing the fields in gold, and nothing urgent stirred. No alarms, no crisis, just wine moving through ripe stalks, the calls of children weaving through the trellises, and the hum of pollinators dancing from blossom to blossom. Aya stood on the threshold of their home-field greenhouse, though hardly recognizable now. Its cracked dome had been replaced with layered bioglass, overgrown with flowering moss that glowed softly at night. The original irrigation system was long gone, replaced by a living network of root-fed water threads that responded to the dryness of the soil with eerie precision. The villagers no longer mocked it. They called it the lattice. Willie was already outside, shirt damp with dew, a toddler clinging to his back, like a son war-armed. Vine Aylin had turned 3 that cycle, but she refused to walk anywhere if she could cling. Instead, she giggled as he stumbled through the rows of red plum grain and giant-leafed coral blossoms, pretending to be pulled under by their weight. Aya watched. Them from the shade arms crossed lightly over her chest, heart full in a way that no measurement could quantify. Shouldn't she be helping you? Not riding you, she called. She's supervising. Willie said, pretending to stagger. She's very strict. Aelinskilled. Faster root sloth, Willie groaned dramatically. Mercy. Aya laughed and walked toward them, her feet brushing across soil she had once been told would reject anything she planted. Now it bloomed wherever she walked. They met in the shade of the old plum tree, now towering and thick with heavy purple fruit. Alan leapt into Aya's arms, sticky fingers pressing against her mother's cheeks. You're warm, the little girl said. You're heavy, Aya replied with a mock frown. Willie grinned and dropped onto the mossy ground with a sigh. She gets that from your side, she gets her stubbornness from yours. They sat together, backs against the tree, sharing pieces of sun-warmed fruit while Aelin nibbled and hummed to herself. The colony beyond their fields had changed too. New families had come, drawn not by directives from the core, but by whispers of soil that healed, of a woman once labeled infertile, now leading a thriving biosector of a garden that grew without permission. More importantly, of hope. The council had stopped trying to assign her tasks. Now they came to ask her advice. Her name, once missing from village records, now topped every registry. Williams, exiled in silence, was now referenced in official teaching modules on ecological restoration. None of that mattered here, though not under this tree. Here there were only fruit-stained hands, soft laughter, the scent of earth, and the steady rise and fall of breath between two people who had chosen not to escape, but to root themselves in something. Relia watched the wind ripple the tall crops, brushing their tops like a soft hand through hair. I used to think peace would feel like silence, she said quietly. Willie looked over, brushing a stray petal from her braid, and now she smiled, watching Aelin curl up with a half-eaten plum in her lap. Now it feels like noise I don't want to live without. They sat like that until the sun dipped, low-talking, resting, listening to the pulse of life all around them when night came, and the moss lights on the greenhouse walls began to glow. They carried their daughter inside, tucked her into a bed, woven from silk grass in memory, and stood together, beneath the arching vines that had grown from their very first seed tray, their fingers intertwined. Tomorrow, he said. We've finished clearing the west plot. She leaned into him. Tomorrow. But today she closed her eyes, forehead against his. Today we just breathe, and they did in the quiet season. In the warm wind, in the heart of a garden no one believed could grow together. The end.